LeetCode problem number 50, implement power. So this function, power, basically calculates x raised to the power of n, right? So here are some examples. Let's say x is 2, n is 10. So 2 to the power of 10 will be 1024. So we also have to take note that x can have decimal points, right? So for example here 2.1 to the power of 3 will be 9.261. We also have to take note that n can be negative as well. So when n is negative, when the power is negative, we have to square the number instead. Or not square, but square root the number instead. So by dividing the number. So let's go over my implementation. This is a rather straightforward problem after all. So here, we first of all check whether or not n is equal to 0, because we know that anything to the power of 0 will return 1. So for this statement handles the square root, right? So what it does is it makes n into an absolute value, so negative 2 to 2, and here it turns x into it divides 1 with x. It turns x into 1 divided by x, right? So for example, if x were to be 2 and n is negative, so we know that we have to square root it, right? So x will become 1 over 2, for instance. Okay, so let's skip this part first. Let's take a look at what happens if x is 2 and n is 10. So we have the result, which is a double, starts off at 1. So while n is more than 0, which it is, right, n is 10, so here we check whether or not n is a odd number, right? Since it's not an odd number, so this if statement will not run. Now we multiply x with itself, so 2 times 2 is now 4. So x is now 4, n will divide by 2, so n is now 5. So now n still more than 0, but now n is a odd number, right? 5. So we times result with x. So in this case, result is 4 times result is 1 times x is 4. After which we multiply x again. So x multiplied with itself is 4 times 4 is 16. N will divide by 2. So now n will be 2.5, but because this is a int, the 0.5 is removed, right? So now n, check again, n is not a odd number. So again, x times equals x. So 16 times 16, which is, what is 16 times 16? So 16 times 16 is 256. 256, after which n will divide equals to 2 again. So n now turns to 1. N is still more than 0, so but n now is a odd number. So result times equals x. So 4 times 256 is 1024. After which n will divide by 2, and 1 divided by 2 will give us 0.5, but since this is an integer, so we just be left with 0. And once n reaches 0, this while loop will end, right, because it's no longer more than n is no longer more than 0, and return our result, which is 1024. Okay, so this works the same way if x has decimal value, but let's see how would it work when n is negative. So again, I'll use this example. X is 2, n is negative 2. Result is 1. So here we check n is not 0. So here we try again. N in this case is lesser than 0, right? So n will equals to the absolute value of n, which is 2. So now both x and n are 2. However, x will be 1 divided by x. So in this case, 1 divided by x is 0.5. So again, we have the results here. Result equals to 1. While n is more than 0, which it is, right? N is 2. It is not an odd number. So x times itself. So 0.5 times 0.5 will give us 0.25. N divided n equals to 2. So n is now 1. So we know how it goes here. Since n is an odd number, we update result. 1 times 0.25 is 0.25. X times itself. But in this case, it doesn't really matter here. Since after n divides by 2 will give us 0. 0.5 technically, but since it's an integer again, it will be cut off to 0. And since this while only runs if n is more than 0, so this while will end and return our result, which is 0.25. Matches the output given in the example. Alright, so that's all I have to show.